All right, welcome everyone to another edition of the SpectrumCast. It's the Data Resilience SpectrumCast, joined by my co-host, Randy Arsenault. Hi, Randy.
Howdy.
And we are joined by Tricia and Sean, our subject matter experts. Hey, guys.
Hey, Sean. Hey, Sean. Randy.
Great to have you all on today.
Kind of a low energy level today. I don't know. I think we're all on our 17th conference call of the day. So,
Well, I do thank you all for being here. Last week was a pretty eventful week for the SpectrumCast, both for ours, for the Data Resilience SpectrumCast, and the Health Check. We talked a lot about some free services that you can get from IBM with regard to your data resilience environment. So we covered in this session the CRAT, the Cyber Resilience Assessment Tool. Again, reach out to your IBM or IBM business partner if you're interested in identifying any gaps in your environment around cyber resiliency. And then in the Health Check, we also had Todd Johnston from our TA or technical advisor team talk about some of the services they are doing for clients who are existing clients on paying maintenance, who are able to have a TA person come in and actually look at a health check of their overall environment and see what they might need to do in order to be better prepared for backup, recovery, disasters, et cetera, et cetera. So good week last week. This week, Sean, you had
and it wasn't last week World Backup Day too?
Oh, thank you, Randy. Yes, exactly.
I'm not even a backup person. Even I knew that.
Last week was backup week
in our community.
We had a lot of great social media around data protection, and we even reposted a number of the SpectrumCasts if you are interested in getting caught up, so to speak, on the data that's out there and the things that we talk about with regard to.
You can binge all of season 1.
There we go. Don't we only have one season?
Yeah, so far. I think we're going to get picked up for another season, though.
I think we are.
Yeah, we're cheap to produce.
Yeah, it's a low budget production.
So this week we actually had a pretty interesting concept, a pretty interesting idea. Sean, you brought up the topic about why don't we talk about the top 5 things that we hate about data protection? And I actually thought it's pretty interesting concept. So because it was your concept, why don't we kick off number 1 with what you think the number 1 reason, or it doesn't have to be the number 1 reason, but a reason why you hate data protection.
Yeah, and I guess I kind of feel bad because it was just World Backup Day, right? And my first one kind of plays into that. And I guess this is, I've been in backup data protection for many, many, many years now, either as a system administrator or as a data protection person or selling products associated with it. And one of the things I really do feel and have felt for a long time is that data protection is kind of underappreciated in the data center. In this sense, and this is the analogy I always use. It's kind of like making the trains run on time, right? It's what's expected when it happens. But if it should go wrong, oh my goodness, everybody is up in arms and ready to jump up and down and attack to get it right, right? And the reality is in a large data center or in the cloud or in any environment where you have hundreds or thousands of systems, you're going to have backup failures every night, right? And you're going to have to deal with them. And so dealing with that can be stressful, and really people don't appreciate it until something goes wrong and they want to recover one of those systems, right? At which point it's a big deal. So that's kind of my big thing psychologically, at least, associated with it. I don't know if anybody else has any comments on that or agrees or disagrees or what.
Well, I started out my career in level 2, and I think the thing that made a big impression on me was the fact that there are so many entities involved in data protection. You're dealing with these new applications, you're dealing with the hardware, you're dealing with the networking. And so on one side, it's really interesting, it keeps you involved, you kind of get to learn all the new technology. But on the other side, it's hard because you've got to make sure that, like you said, you're going to have failures. And a lot of time these failures are caused by a network outage, a tape outage, something that might not even be as a backup admin under your direct control. And so that's kind of that love-hate of, yeah, you get to experience a lot of things, but then you're so dependent upon so much technology, entering technology, old technology. It really covers the gamut.
Yeah, that kind of leads into mine as we celebrate Backup Festivus and the airing of grievances. So I started my career as a programmer and then eventually a DBA and an architect. So I was always on kind of the dev side of the house. And we always had great disdain, for the backup administrators because, they didn't understand our code. They would take our databases down at inopportune times. They wouldn't quiesce them properly. We'd have transactional, disruptions. And so it always created this like battle and this friction between the development side of the house and the kind of operation side of the house. Now that's, with the advent of containerization and to a lesser degree, virtual machines, that's changing a little bit because there's a lot more cross-pollination and overlap, especially with containers, where that whole administrative portfolio of skills and tasks is generally within one group. And if not, it's a very closely coupled group of teams or a team of closely coupled individuals. So that was always my heartburn with backup and data protection in general, is that, it seemed like we were constantly having to redefine the policies, and we spent a lot of time working with the backup admins, and I'm sure they thought we were a pain in the butt as well. So it always created this weird little internecine battle between like the developers and the the backup and data protection admin folks, and even the sysadmins. And I think that's probably still happens in bigger shops. I'm sure it does. So.
I think it's even, and this goes to what you and Sean both said, which is, I think over the course of helping our sellers and folks talk and learn about data protection, and kind of even go as far as to say, how to talk to companies that are doing data protection, over the last decade or so, I would say that we've seen the role of the backup administrator, the specific role of backup administrator, really morph and be, I don't want to say less technical, but that role has been mushed together with a whole bunch of other things and a whole bunch of other responsibilities. And because of that, maybe you didn't have the skill set of someone who was just focused, as Tricia said, right? You got to really have someone that knows what's going on. So when you get folks, Randy, like you said, people come into a person who isn't maybe necessarily a backup admin per se, asking for all these changes, and that's kind of tricky. Sean, you got the person running around trying to keep the trains running on time, but they also have 50 other things to do. That creates a lot of controversy in the environment.
Yeah, I mean, and I think some of the more contemporary solutions that we talk about pretty regularly mitigate that to a degree by doing things like adding some value to the backup and data protection process. So it's not just that like necessary insurance. You can now have, higher levels of data reuse. You can do copy data management. You can do some interesting things with spinning up and provisioning and spinning down development environments and test environments. So in many ways, I think that's kind of bridged the gap a little bit and created a better, more effective level of communication between the DevOps folks and the operational people. And you see them coming together more. But, again, I'm sure within our large customers, the big enterprises, I'm sure there's still those little blame storming sessions that occur whenever something goes wrong between the backup and ops people and the applications people.
Well, I was just going to say, Randy, that, one of the other things that's on my list is kind of just what you just touched on a little bit, which is the perception that data protection is a cost, not a benefit, right? Mm-hmm. This is only something that is going to cost me money, right? And usually, and unfortunately, in many cases, more money than you expected it would cost, right?
Yeah.
So there's this constant going back to the business, the company, and saying, well, what you've allocated for this is not quite enough. I need thus and so more. And it's like, oh my God, you're the bad guy, right? Because you're always asking for more.
Yeah, but to your earlier point, that everybody's upset about it until you actually need it, at which point everybody's your best friend. It's like everybody hates you and then everybody's your best friend. And then the day after they'll hate you again. But I mean, that's just the nature of it, I guess. I don't know how you change that perception. Well,
Oh,
maybe by doing things like adding value with CDP and other things like that.
I think that's one of the ways. And I was going to say, I think my wife will tell you that, she comes to me once a year when she writes the insurance check. And like I'm always in a bad mood that day until I actually need the insurance.
There you go.
Tricia, what is one of your things you hate about data protection?
What I hate about data protection is having to know all the entities that are associated with it. So back to my original comment of you've got to know the databases, you've got to know the hardware, you've got to have at least an understanding of how the cloud is working. So you have to be a specialist in data protection and then a generalist in all these other areas. So that really keeps you on your toes, as well as having to know historically these legacy systems that are still out there needing protected.
You mean you don't just press the big red backup button and send it on its way?
The big
I think we're kind of trying to get to that point. I mean, I think we're making backup a lot easier and a lot more repeatable and automated, but it's still going to have its foibles.
Well, you can make the backup easy and repeatable, but you're going to have hardware failures. You're going to have network failures. You're going to have other things go wrong outside of the process.
Yep.
This is why that need for someone who's actually focused on data protection is so important, because it's not so much, okay, things are running on time, so that's good, right? It's when things do go bump in the night, do they know how to troubleshoot these issues to a degree that allows them to be efficient at getting the systems back up and running and in order for the next night to be able to do their backups again, right?
Or if they're having a true hardware or true software failure, do they know, for instance, the database is well enough to know the most efficient way to restore them and bring them back most rapidly so that database can be up and running?
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, that conflict or that inherent conflict I talked about before has also spawned a whole kind of almost a divergence, right? Because the traditional sort of backup at the system level still exists, but then you also have very specialized backup capabilities for relational databases, for VM farms, for container clusters. So now you get this kind of sprawl situation where every group or every function within your infrastructure has its own kind of fit for purpose data protection scheme. And that's, for the operations team, that's got to be immensely challenging to manage.
And for the business, right?
Standardized too, right?
Yeah, right. That's not, when everybody's off doing their own thing, that's not a business, right? That's everybody off doing their own thing and running their own little businesses, so to say. And I guess, there's a commonality here, and we talked about this topic before we started discussing it. And, one of the things that was brought up by Steve is, well, what can you do to alleviate some of these problems, right? And I think we've kind of touched on it and danced around it a little bit, but I think the answer to a lot of these things is good communication from the people who is doing this, right? It's, for instance, taking your successes and failures, documenting them properly, putting them properly into the ticketing systems, using the capabilities of the software to do that, and communicating to management and the other people involved, hey, this is where things are working, this is where things are not working, right? Where we need to improve. The costs is another example, right? It's yes, and it's kind of like I go back to paying my insurance. Yes, I am paying my insurance every year, but this is what I'm getting for it, right? And same thing with the cost of backup. Data is growing, costs are going up, but you'll find an amazing number of people who are in IT who don't really understand how much data they have, don't have it properly categorized, don't know how important it is. And then it becomes very difficult to justify the cost, right? It's just another bill that you have to pay without any kind of rhyme or reason to back it up.
And I think that not realizing the cost and the value, because so many businesses underestimate what is the value of that customer database? What is the value of those proprietary blueprints or whatever else we're storing out on IT? When those go down, suddenly you're not getting your beer made like we said in our last story last week. Then,
Oh,
boy, suddenly the
remind
value
me.
shows up.
Yeah.
So
It's all fun and games until the brewery is unavailable. Then,
Yep.
Times are hard.
Shit's getting real.
So I'm actually going to take the opposite approach, I think, about the number one thing I hate about backup is I kind of hate hearing about how backup is so difficult. I mean, I know it is, but the reality is if we do a lot of the things that we talk about on this podcast, hopefully it really shouldn't be so difficult, right? I mean, if we had started classifying data years ago, and if we had started using the right tools to back up the most important data and putting it on the right device, and yes, Sean, I do agree, all of this comes down to money and budgets, right? But if we had started doing that, right, and now the data is going to the right device for the right recovery needs, it's going to the right place for the right long-term retention, right? Hopefully, in theory, a lot of the things that you have to do day to day now start to run on their own. And now you become the data protection doctor, right? You're there doing preventative maintenance every day on if you're paying attention to what your ingest looks like, if you're paying attention to what your growth rates look like, if you're paying attention to your deduplication rates or your storage efficiency rates, you can properly right size that back end. And you can do it in plenty of time in order for you to be able to grow into that and do it really well. But I do agree, budget comes into play big time here. 2 is skill, right? If you don't have the time or the skill set to sit down and have that be your job, right? Those things aren't easy and they break. And then finally, I think, Sean, you're right on. You're dead on. Communication, right? When you pay your insurance, you get that booklet every year that says, here's all the things you're entitled to. Nobody ever reads it, right? And so when you get in a car wreck, the shit hits the fan, right? So, you gotta kind of go back to, okay, what can you do proactively to make sure you're paying attention to the different things that are going on?
I will channel Trisha's regular refrain: test, test, test. Words to live by.
That is right.
I know one thing I hate about data protection is it does not make a good cocktail party conversation. People don't care.
You must not be going to the right cocktail party, Trisha. I don't know.
Great stories to tell at the cocktail party.
So you have to save them all up, Tricia, and we have to talk about them at the next Tech U.
Yes,
exactly.
That's some exciting barroom talk right there.
Everyone's standing around the beer cart, talking about data protection.
That's one of the things I'm looking forward to. So we'll be back there soon enough.
All right, Tricia, you know what time it is.
Oh, yes.
Tool
Here
time.
we go. My favorite time.
So today's tool tip is going to be Servermon. And this actually fits right into what we're talking about, is if there is a problem, specifically with your backup, Spectrum Protect can now collect all of this data about the logs, everything together via the Servermon tool, so that when you do call up support, you can get them the logs and the information so they can debug what happened, why did the backup fail. And so Servermon was originally a level 2 script, Perl script that they were running they had developed on their own. And then in 8.15, we introduced it into the Spectrum Protect server, and it'll actually start up when the Spectrum Protect server starts up automatically. We've kept adding enhancements, and in this next version that we've got coming out here shortly, we'll have additional enhancements for the Servermon. So I'll shoot a link for one of the older YouTubes, and then I'm working on a new YouTube with the latest enhancements on Servermon. But check it out, make sure you've got Servermon up and running, because if you do have a problem with your backup, this will definitely help you work with support to rapidly resolve the issue.
So if I can ask a dumb question, Tricia, Servermon, that's something built by IBM, right? That comes with Protect. Yep.
Correct.
And I think you just said when you start Spectrum Protect, now it automatically starts up.
Yeah, so it's just some it'll start up the Servermon script, which will be collecting these logs, and then it actually zips and compresses and sends those logs into the Spectrum Protect server itself so that you can store them long term. So that if the level 2 folks need to the support folks need to go back further in time, they can extract even older logs out of your Spectrum Protect server.
Fantastic. And Servermon works for Protect and Protect Plus, if I'm not mistaken, right?
It's a Protect script.
It's a Protect script.
Protect Plus. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Good. Trisha's tooltip. I like it.
It is a good one.
All right, Randy, now you're up. What is in the news today?
All right. So let's spin the wheel of misfortune this week. And I think we all know what will come up. And it is, of course, the massive 500 million user data leak at Facebook that occurred over the weekend. So this is not the first time this has happened to Facebook. There have been a number of incidents like this. What's kind of interesting about this one is that, and I won't read the whole story here, but it took a while for them to acknowledge it. And it was a kind of an awkward case where it wasn't until it was noticed by an external watchdog agency that they then kind of copped to it. So they haven't said explicitly what the cause was. They suspect it's a vulnerability to do with the way that Facebook users can import and export contact information to build out their friend list and so forth. So they think it was an exploit that hackers were able to find and take advantage of, but they're not entirely sure. They're still trying to kind of sort through exactly what happened. But obviously, a classic example, we talked about Molson last time. We talked about obviously the big SolarWinds breach, earlier. So, and again, we kind of joke about it, but it really is becoming now. I've set up these automatic searches so that at any point in time, I can just click and see within the past 24 hours how many cyber attacks, ransomware attacks, data breaches have occurred, and invariably there are thousands. So.
That had been disclosed and admitted, right? And it's only
Correct.
admitted. It's only admitted if there are external.
Well, I mean, it depends. I mean, some organizations are better than others in terms of transparency and kind of making sure people. Now, this is not financial information, so there aren't as many compliance requirements for reporting and disclosing it. Financial institutions have a much tighter set of requirements they have to adhere to. So if they even suspect a breach, they have to immediately make it public and announce it. And like you saw, not that it was, there was some specialized, personalized information in the Molson thing. That's why they had to file that form with the SEC to disclose that they had a breach, right? They were required by law to do that. So, it obviously varies industry by industry, but
country by country, right?
And country by country, yeah. And actually, the U.S. is kind of a laggard in that regard. I mean, GDPR and the EU nations are ahead of us in terms of disclosure requirements. So anyway, if you're on Facebook, there is actually a site called Have I Been Pwned? You can put in your email address or put in your Facebook ID, and it will let you know whether or not you've been a victim of this. So, there's a whole cottage industry now cropping up around, helping you identify if you've been hacked or compromised.
They're taking your email address and they're using it.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, it's probably run by the FSB. But so anyway, Facebook once again in the news for all the wrong reasons.
So Randy, you had mentioned that the SEC and all that stuff. They require people to report that they've been breached or hacked. But you have to imagine with all these social media sites and all the scrutiny they're under. I think they were even talking to Congress 2 weeks ago about issues in data privacy and personal privacy. You got to believe that those guys are under a lot of scrutiny these days.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, there have been more, congressional hearings on social media platforms in the last 12 months than cumulatively all of history prior. So, yeah, they're definitely under a lot of pressure. And I think if they want to resist or continue to combat regulation, they're going to have to be more transparent and have to come up with some better policies around disclosure and data protection and privacy protection. So be interesting to see.
Great.
But obviously events like this with 500 million exposed users, don't really help their case. So we'll see what happens.
500 million.
Yeah.
Well, great, and thanks for the share, and thank you everyone today for the interesting conversation around the things you hate about data protection. So, as you're thinking about those things, think about some of the things that we've talked about over the past few episodes about how you can help yourself kind of get better and get more up to speed, and kind of getting your arms around the whole data resilience environment that you might be monitoring and paying attention to. But with that, I want to say thank you everyone, and have a fantastic day.